right, everyone, thank you. Welcome to Breaking Barriers for Climate Conversation. My name is Hiromi. I'll be helping out facilitate today. We would love to just start off by having you all put your name and your pronouns in the chat here. And the last thing is here at the Climate Initiative, or TCI, we like to do Indigenous land recognition. And we realized that that is just the first start of helping out with the problem, the historic problem, but really it's the first start. So we would be honored for you all to put your names, your pronouns, and let us know what land of Indigenous peoples you live on. The Climate Initiative takes place on the Abenaki Indian reservation and lands. And with that, I would love to introduce you all to the three great speakers we have today. So from the left to the right, first I'll just say the names, and then I'll give you just their bios. First, we have the great Evelyn Abellio. Then we have Ashley Hawking, and then we have Caitlin Neal Jones. All right, so let's start with Evelyn. Evelyn, a 45-year-old resident of Alaska, Evelyn P. Abellio immigrated to the US in 1976 after starting her first career as an educator in the Philippines. She began a second career in civil enforcement at the Alaska State Human Rights Commission, retiring as investigations director in 2006 after 30 years of service. Returning to school, she received a master's degree in counseling psychology, embarked on a third career as a licensed professional counselor. After employment as a dual diagnosis counselor of the Salvation Army's Clitheroe Center in 2008, she worked as a clinical therapist for the South Central Foundational DENA, emotional and physiological disorders. She retired from this position at 2019. Evelyn is a 2009 Woman of Achievement Award recipient. Congratulations. A member of the American Counseling Association, a life member of the Filipino community of Anchorage, and a long-term member of Literary Ladies, a women's book club in Anchorage. She is a board member of Alaska Eating Disorder Alliance and facilitates the nonprofit's monthly support group for families and friends caring for loved ones with eating disorders. So welcome, Evelyn. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next is Ashley. Ashley Hawking is a sophomore at American University in DC, studying environmental science with a passion for gardening, art, music, teaching children, and being barefoot. She challenged her eccentric love of nature into climate activism as a teenager, volunteering at community gardens and learning at conferences, local events, and her university. She believes every person serves as an advocate for the environment and that there are no barriers, language borders, age gaps, etc. should prevent working together to prevent our only home. Her goal is to one day own an educational orchid attached to a farm-to-table restaurant. And this, she hopes to create a sense of community and learning, especially through outreach to children, as she believes it's critical for future generations to be raised with environmental awareness. Today, Ashley is excited to share strategies that foster community for building a better world. And lastly, the TCI representative for today is Caitlin Neal Jones. She serves as Louisiana Regional Coordinator for the Climate Initiative. Prior to joining TCI, Caitlin spent a decade working in clinical mental health, career counseling, and most recently, school counseling. She has served in primary, secondary, and post-secondary institutions, providing students and educators support. Caitlin is a national certified counselor and a member of the Louisiana Counseling Association. During her time as a school counselor, Caitlin volunteered with the Southern Association of College Admissions Counseling to promote equity in college access for students. She's excited for bringing her expertise in relationship building to her work with TCI. So those are our three great speakers for today. And one last thing before I hand it off to Caitlin is if you all have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll have a chance to answer those at the end. I'll be recording those questions. If you have any problems as well, feel free to private message me And again, we'd love for you all to put your pronouns in the chat and which Indigenous peoples' lands you live on. With that, I'll pass it over to Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Romy, for the great introductions. My name is Caitlin Neal Jones, she, her, hers pronoun, and I am talking to you today from Lafayette, Louisiana, which is the indigenous lands of the Attakapaw Indians. So just to give you really quickly the context and background for why we're doing this today. One of the really guiding principles of the climate initiative is that we're working towards nonpartisan, holistic, global solutions for a problem that affects everyone. And I imagine that if you're here today, that you are working towards the same issue that we are, and that you're already having conversations with people about climate change and climate activism, or you're wanting to become more involved in that role. And you may have experienced something that I've experienced, which is that sometimes when we engage in conversations that involve personal or political ideologies or really beliefs that are personal to us, it can become sometimes more of a debate or more of a trying to prove your point and become very defensive. So what we're hoping to do today is to provide you with a framework for climate conversations or other types of difficult conversations in order for you to be mentally prepared to maintain open communication and break those barriers in a situation that might otherwise be sort of defensive. So today, after the end of this webinar, you're going to be able to approach these climate conversations utilizing this framework with specific examples of language and techniques that will actually build a bridge and help you communicate and will sort of overcome those barriers. You're going to be able to create an empathetic connection with the other person that you're speaking to and to the topic of climate change. And you're going to be able to effectively communicate across certain demographics, specifically age demographics. So I'm going to kick us off talking about prepping yourself for these conversations with some great mindset techniques and the way that you present this with your language. So before you begin these conversations, I encourage everyone starting today to go home and do some prep work. So prior to engaging in conversations, you want to be prepared because this can happen at the family dinner table, the grocery store, and a class that you're in. These conversations might happen, and it's really good to have a mindset and a framework prepared. So one of the ways that you're going to do that is you're going to really know and define your values and your long-term goals, which is your own. And if you're someone like me, I represent TCI when I speak to other people. So I have to know my organization's goals and values as well. And you are going to keep these in mind and always bring yourself back to, are my words and actions reinforcing long-term goals and values? So in the moment, if you get a little bit defensive or it feels hostile, you might want to jump to a short-term goal, like I need to prove them wrong, or I need to prove that I'm right. So if you can come back to a long-term goal, such as a long-term goal for our organization is getting the whole globe on the same page about our shared future. So I keep that in mind and know that I'm representing that goal. After you do that work, you're going to choose or create for yourself a really short 2 to 3 to 4 word, what I call mantra, that you're going to say in your head a lot prior to these conversations. So it's there in the front of your mind when these conversations come up. And that mantra is going to focus you on your values and goals. So it could be something like create connections, think of the future, or something like building bridges. I'm going to build a bridge, right? 2 to 3 words. And then I can always keep that in mind and say, is this conversation building a bridge? Are my actions right now building a bridge? And so how do you put that into practice? One of the things is I really encourage you to share that intention with the other person. So I can say, hey, I want to let you know my goal today is just to build a bridge with you so that we can have further communication. I want to open that up so that you trust me and you can ask me questions and I can ask you questions. At any time that you feel the conversation sort of becoming more hostile or veering into territory that you didn't want it to go to, restate that, reaffirm that. You can say, right now I'm feeling myself getting anxious and it seems like it's getting more tense. And since our whole goal today was just to build a bridge, let's come back to that and let's come back to what we agree on. So secondly, and Ashley's going to talk about this later and do a great job, you're always looking for the commonalities. Remind yourself of those commonalities, listen for them, seek them out in the conversation. Some ways that you put this into practice are a counseling technique we call using joining words or joining phrases. So things like ours, we, us are going to almost unconsciously make the other person feel joined with you as well. So we're talking about our shared future, or what can we do to make the world better for our children and future generations. So always using those words to remind them of what we share. And then when you hear or notice commonalities, point them out verbally. So if I'm talking to someone and they say, I've lived in Louisiana my whole life and I love the nature here. That's something I love too. So I can say, we both share a passion for the outdoors in Louisiana. And that's one of the reasons we both love living here. What can we do to protect the land, our land? So point those out to folks. And then be aware of the way that your body language and nonverbals are either joining you or creating division. So things like staying very open and loose, making eye contact, leaning forward and nodding. All of those will signal that you are joined with that person and will make them feel more connected to you as well. And eliminating judgment from your own mindset and in a lot of the words that you use. So judgment in essence is categorizing. So when we make a judgment on something, we're placing it into a category or making it fit into our own picture. But oftentimes we're usually making judgments without a lot of information. So the best antidote to judgment is curiosity. So I want you to always remain curious about this other person and about where they're coming from. And so you're going to demonstrate that by asking lots of questions, all sorts of open-ended questions. So tell me a little bit more about your family's connection to Louisiana. What have you noticed about hurricanes? Have you noticed that hurricanes have gotten worse recently? Or what are the sources that you get your information from when you get science or climate information? And so you're gathering a lot of information, and you're also being curious and non-judgmental about that other person. And that's going to teach you more about them and provide other inroads to talk to them, because it's going to open up so much more that you know about their life and their background. And finally, a little technique that I learned from a woman named Tasha Urich. She wrote a book called Insight. She's a business consultant, and she was writing about managerial skills. And she said when you give performance reviews, to not ask why, because the question why tends to force people into a judgment. Right? We need to classify something. Why didn't it happen? Or why did you let the ball drop on this? So instead, she says that we use what questions, because what opens up to creativity and possibilities. So what could we do differently in the future? Right? So what have you noticed about climate in Louisiana? What have you noticed about hurricanes and flooding? What do you see as some of the things that we should teach our children about taking care of the environment? So these what are going to invite that person. You're not judging and shutting down. It's inviting creativity and collaboration. So I gave you a little bit of the mindset to start working with. So next, we're going to get into some techniques for the conversation. And I'm going to pass it to my friend Evelyn, and she's going to talk to you about connecting emotionally with people, even in very emotionally charged situations.
Thank you, Caitlin. And hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here and to talk about this important topic. But before I begin, I'd like to recognize where I'm speaking to you from in Anchorage, which is a city that sits on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascan tribes, who have cared for these lands for generations, long before it became known as Anchorage. So, how my topic or my part of the discussion today is how to connect with people who become angry or upset when we talk about climate change issues. And it might be a conversation that we have with our partner, a best friend, a coworker, a family member, or a casual conversation with a stranger, that we might strike up a conversation while waiting in line at the checkout counter, at the checkout line at the grocery store. So these are people that we interact with, either long-term or casually, and sometimes, and I would say oftentimes, these conversations could become very heated because we're talking about issues that are very important to all of us. And because the conversation gets very, very heated, we might end up lashing out, walking away, or just withdrawing. And the whole thing devolves into an argument or a conflict, and we end up losing, but perhaps or causing friction in our relationships, or having that making a scene in the grocery store. So this is because we may have some passionate beliefs about our respective positions, and when we become angry, we get so emotional that we forget about what our purpose is in the conversation. So instead of having a meaningful exchange or sharing of ideas or experiences, we find ourselves in a difficult position where we become defensive because we're attacked. We feel disrespected, we feel hurt, and so we withdraw or walk away. And the people we're having the conversation with feel the same way. Underneath all that anger, the defensiveness, and withdrawing or lashing out are feelings of hurt, fear, and our brains go into a fight or flight or freeze mode. So how do we connect and engage with these folks who become upset or angry because they disagree with us, or because they're feeling hurt, scared, or threatened? So how do we focus our intention for our conversation or on our long-term goal, as Caitlin had suggested, so that we can have positive and meaningful conversations about climate issues? So I'd like to share with you a strategy that might help break these barriers. Now, I did not come up with this technique myself. I wish I did, but I want to give credit to Bill Eddy, a lawyer, a therapist, and a mediator who developed this strategy of using E.A.R, E-A-R statements to help calm angry people, so that we can connect with them and engage with them in a more meaningful conversation. So E.A.R stands for, E stands for empathy. And if we can get to the next slide, please. There we go. According to Mr. Eddy, using this technique allows us to do something different than or opposite to what we want to do. So when we become defensive, because we're being attacked, of course, our emotions start to, get a hold of us. And so instead of becoming defensive, we use an E.A.R statement so that we can connect with the other person's feelings, thoughts, and experience. So this technique is similar to a counseling technique in emotion-focused therapy, where we use validation to convey an understanding of the other person's experience and provide support emotionally and physically to the needs of that person. So let's take a look at an example that Mr. Eddie has given us. This is not related to climate conversations, but you know, an example of a conversation where someone is attacking us. So let's say the situation is, you know, someone has called us, left a message, maybe several messages on voicemail, and the person is upset because we have not returned the call in a time period that the person was expecting, you know, right away. So the person may say, you don't respect me. You don't care how long I have to wait to deal with this problem. You're not doing your job. So those are attack statements. And, you know, our hackles are up and we want to defend ourselves. You know, that the fight, flight, or freeze response in our brains start to go haywire. So instead of defending yourself, Mr. Eddie suggests we use an E.A.R statement. So for empathy, an example could be, wow, I can hear how upset you are. This is something that must be really important to you. You know, being able to get a call back right away. An example for attention is asking the person for more information. Tell me what's really going on. Tell me about how this problem is affecting you. And an example of respect is a statement saying, for example, I share your concerns about this problem that you called me about, and I really respect your efforts at solving this problem. So, you know, being empathetic, giving attention, being respectful, it helps to calm that part of the brain where, you know, we feel threatened. And then we can have a more respectful conversation. So let's have some examples of statements when we're having conversations about climate change. Let's see here. So for example, I'm having a conversation with a friend whose father, grandfather, great-grandfather had worked in coal mines for generations. And I am saying, oh, you know, natural gas is so much cheaper and it's better for the environment than coal. So, you know, we have a heated conversation about this. So if I were to validate my friend's feeling about, you know, using coal to heat homes, I might say something like, I see and understand that relying on natural gas instead of coal to heat our homes is very upsetting to you because your dad, your granddad, great-granddad have worked in the coal mines for generations. An example of attention in this conversation is to say, so tell me more about how the coal industry has helped you and your family, besides, you know, deriving income from working in the mines. And so my friend may start talking about all the development that have gone on in our community, all the, lives that have been, economic lives that have improved because of the coal industry. And, we end up, listening to one another. Now, an example of using a respect statement in a conversation, I might say, I recognize that you value your family and being able to support and provide for your family is very important to you. That is a trait that I respect in you. And so a combination of all these statements, being empathetic, paying attention, being respectful, could result in a more meaningful conversation with my friend. So, things to remember. Please don't lie when you are giving examples or making factual statements or finding the quality in a person that you can respect. Be honest and sincere. So in the example that I gave about respecting a trait of being, the need to provide for the family, that has to be an honest and sincere statement. And check in with yourself. Are you calm? And if you feel like, you're starting to feel agitated, make sure that you take some deep breaths to calm yourself. Also, monitor your tone of voice. Because if you're feel yourself, raising your voice, that could elevate the conflict. And remember that using E.A.R statements, that does not mean that you agree with the other person. This is more about how we can connect with the other person by validating their feelings. Now, and it's important to manage our amygdalas, that part of the brain that protects us when we feel threatened. So, taking deep breaths can help calm our amygdalas. And last but not least, practice. This may sound intimidating at first, but the more you practice this, it could become second nature. And it's not just probably conversations about climate change. It could be conversations about anything else that we have with friends and family members. So I would like to turn it over to Caitlin.
Ashley has the final part.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Caitlin, Evelyn, for all that awesome information. My name is Ashley, and I'm speaking from American University in Washington, D.C., in which the Algonquian nations were indigenous tribes that were here before us. And today I'm going to be building off of what Caitlin and Evelyn talked about, and specifically how to break down barriers like age gaps when we have climate change conversations. So my approach is called the 3 C's. We all know calm, cool, and collected. Today we're going to switch it up a little bit. We're going to be centered, caring, and creative. Who am I and why does this work? As someone studying environmental science and who's really passionate about nature, I come into contact with these conversations a lot. But I'm human, and I acknowledge these conversations are really difficult, sometimes really heavy, and sometimes difficult to navigate when there's an age gap. I still blush, stutter, hesitate, and this can be really, disempowering. But these strategies are things that have personally helped me, These are things that I've observed in other conversations. These are things I've researched on that help you feel empowered and comfortable having these conversations, which also help you to empower the person you're talking to. So the first step of this is being centered. You have to bridge the gap within yourself. As Caitlin was talking about, you need to know your intentions before you enter them, or you enter the conversation. They have to be good intentions, and you have to acknowledge that you have room to learn too. So as some of us might be climate activists, our brains are kind of already programmed about, reducing our emissions, sustainable solutions, all these things that some people, okay, they might not have had any experience with. And that's okay. No matter where you're coming from when you have these conversations, acknowledge that you're going to learn something new just as much as you're to teach the other person something new. When you are centered in yourself, you need to make sure you're having self-care practices that sustain you. Activism burnout is real, and these are heavy conversations sometimes. You cannot take the weight of the world on in every conversation. And, so you need to make sure you're centered in yourself and know that. And it's okay not to take the weight of the world on in everything. And lastly, don't doubt your capacity to teach or talk about climate change. There's something we all share. It's the earth. Therefore, it's our responsibility to talk about our experience here and to share and learn from others. And this involves being caring, our next C. So caring is when you're bridging the gap with others. And I want to be very specific when I talk about bridging a gap. When you go into a conversation in which you find a difference, do not focus on the fact that there is a gap in a negative way. Oh, they're so much older than me. They're so much younger than me. They'll never understand where I'm coming from. Don't do that. When you believe there's this huge gap, you're reinforcing this barrier. You're thinking it's impossible to overcome. You're focusing on, all these differences instead of more of, Earth. So go in and acknowledge different perspectives. This is what makes us unique. This is what makes us beautiful. This is what makes us have really interesting perspectives. And go in remembering and rooted in the fact that we have common humanity because we share one planet. Therefore, we need to work together to make change. This overrides any barrier. And when you do this, you will find your conversations being a lot more empathetic and a lot more empowering, which is super uniting. Another caring strategy is to be an active listener. Do not formulate all of your responses while they're talking, the other person's talking, or maybe you're blocking out what they're saying. Just wait and hear out what they say. Again, learn from them and then, respond. Teaching and sharing is not fighting. And lastly, it's not just about the science. It's about embracing it. So when we're approaching age gaps, it requires different strategies. Based on your age and your relationship, people are going to respond to different things. People might respond differently to logical appeals, to emotional appeals. And so some might ask, okay, why can't we just teach the science then, right? Well, yeah, of course, we need to be educated. We need to understand the facts. But we also need to start shifting our climate conversations past arguing indisputable science. We all know the bottom line. We know where climate change is coming from. We know how much it's going to hurt us. But it's not about just understanding all of that, because we can get it and we cannot feel any impetus to do anything about it. Therefore, when we have these conversations, it's all about creating connections with others that expand worldviews and reduce polarization, because that's where it gets really tricky. We're really polarized on the topic of climate change. So with these different groups, and especially I'll be talking today about age gaps, there's going to be different worldviews. But the characteristics in these age groups can actually be used to an advantage and not a barrier. For example, young people are extremely impressionable and imaginative. They have so much curiosity. They want to learn about the world. When you talk about climate change, there are no limits to solutions. And it's also super important because the younger generations are going to be staring these problems in the face. So their curiosity is really important to foster. Older generations, they're very experienced. They've lived this life. They've gone through a lot. They have a routine. This doesn't mean that they're not going to listen to your concerns about climate change. This might mean that they have really creative solutions because they've already pretty much seen it all. Millennials, they're super involved with current trends in technology. If you can convince a millennial that there's going to be progress from being an environmentalist and that it's trendy, it can take off. It really can. So again, these different groups have, different strategies that you need to use in order to approach them because they respond differently. And that means we got to get creative, our next C. So I have to acknowledge this. As a 19-year-old, my age gaps are going to look a little bit different from you. If you're 35, you're ancient. No, just kidding. But something we all, have an age gap between is that none of us are kids. So, and this is the future generation. Interacting with kids is critical. They need to be connected with our environment. So maybe you're a teacher, a parent, an older sibling. Maybe this will even inspire you to, babysit. Everyone should have that experience, in my opinion, because you will find out that kids love questions. They love to ask them. So answer them, make them excited, ask them back, get them involved. What's your favorite plant? What was the weather like? How did it make you feel when you went outside today? Kids are getting wrapped up in technology. We need kids connected to Earth. Kids also, in order to learn, they need to have fun. So make it into a game. They don't know all the fancy science lingo, so break down your vocab. And when we break down our vocab, this is also something that teaches us. If we can make it simple for kids and kids can get it, we realize that having these conversations are not as tricky as they seem. They're not as daunting. We can make it simple. And of course, encouragement and reinforcement. When you are encouraging kids, and let's say you're not shutting down their questions, because when you shut down questions that kids ask, they're going to start attaching a negative connotation to what they're asking about. Use high fives, use hugs when appropriate, use stickers and good jobs, make them excited. Okay, so let's say you are approaching your parents about this. It's not always easy depending on your relationship, but a good starting point that a lot of families are worried about is money and safety. So first, research the habits of your family. What would it look like if you stopped buying water bottles all year? How much money would you save? What would it look like? What are the returns on solar panels? What if you installed water-saving devices on your toilets and showers? How much would your water bill go down? When you start talking about these things, first of all, your parents get hooked. Second of all, you can start talking about the safety and what you want the world to look like as their kid and them being your parents when you grow up. Now for adolescents. And I'm allowed to say this because I'm part of this generation, but adolescents either blame everything on others or everything on themselves. Truly, this is a symbol of our passion and of our distress and kind of looking at where the world is today. It's scary. But when you can encourage young adults to feel passionate in a good way and take action, this can have huge change. When you're approaching older generations, you need to work to understand, learn, and ask about how the environment shifted in their life. Think about this. Older generations did not grow up with all the fancy technology we had. They grew up playing outside. They are more, or at least were, more emotionally attuned to the environment more than we might ever be. This really affects them too, So you can teach them about the new technology we have to get us back to that emotional and environmental attunement to the earth. And then next, here is another group that this is also ideological, but can be associated with age groups. What do you do when you find someone who is rationalizing the status quo? And what is the status quo? Well, the status quo is any norm or standard in our culture that we're super used to. And in American history, our status quo has been, since industrialization, we've believed that we've had to have never-ending consumption and economic growth using non-renewable sources, creating factories to kind of continue all this progress and advancement we've had. And this ideology believes that environmentalism is incompatible with current social and economic institutions. People are worried about shifting to green energy because they're going to lose jobs. They're going to lose, the norms they're used to. This does not mean that it's not compatible. We can reconcile this through something called system-sanctioned change. And that's when you reapproach a conversation into a framework that adopts both values. The American way of life that we're used to, the American dream, it depends on a healthy and natural environment. It is patriotic to defend and protect your land. Therefore, environmentalism not only upholds these socioeconomic institutions we have, but we need to adopt more sustainable practices. We need to cut our emissions. We need to relook at how we have everything today and refocus it to be more green so that we can have success in our country. An example of how system-sanctioned change that Obama gave in one of his speeches was, I don't see the little screenshot. There's supposed to be a little speech here.
Oh, I see it, Ashley.
Oh no, okay.
1 second, I can put it in the chat for you, Ashley. Or I can even read it.
Up to you. If it doesn't come up, I can summarize.
I can read it for you, actually. So Obama in 2008 wrote, "This investment will not only help us reduce our dependence on foreign oil, making the United States more secure, will not only help us bring about a clean energy future, saving our planet, will also help us transform our industries and steer our country out of this economic crisis by generating 5 million new green jobs that pay well and can't be outsourced."
Thank
Thus,
you. Oh, thank you, Hiromi. So really quick, Obama uses both vocab that shows how we can help our environment and help our economy. Therefore, it's not a threat to the status quo that we're used to. In fact, environmental practices are an opportunity for progress. So throughout these strategies that I mentioned, we can find that all of the values we have as people with differing perspectives also align with our environmental goals, or what should be our environmental goals. Because at the end of the day, we share the earth. We all have this in common. So when you're wrapping up a climate conversation, you always want to end on a good note. You want to thank them for their time. You want to thank them for their perspective, the discussion, and the conversation doesn't stop there. Don't let it. Ask advice. As Kayla was talking about, ask what? What should we do about consumption? What should big industries do? How can we, reduce our impact? Keep the conversation rolling. You can invite people to events that are sustainable, like maybe you're going to a farmer's market, maybe you're going to a climate change protest. If you were talking to someone who was a stranger, they're no longer strangers. Again, we all share the earth. That makes us all have something in common. If it's appropriate, link up. If you're younger, maybe you're sharing a social media. Maybe you're sharing your favorite sustainable business that they can go check out. And lastly, collaborate and develop a plan with others so that you have a strategy and points that you took away from the conversation moving forward. For your parents, how is grocery shopping going to look? Should you install solar panels? For your friends, should we have, plastic cups at our party and things like that? And then in good practice, I would like to thank you all for this, for coming and listening today.
All right, so that's the end of our actual presentation, but we wanted to share just really quickly with you all, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, a couple of maybe real world examples. So we're going to role play conversations that you all might have at any point in time. So I'll kick us off. Ashley, I'm going to give you a scenario. So let's say that you and I are roommates in college, and you study environmental science. I'm really not up to this on this stuff. So I'm getting ready to throw a party, and I'm buying all my Solo cups, and we sort of have an argument about this. So maybe I might say something like, Ashley, look, it's like 3 bags of red Solo cups. I know the environment means a lot to you, but if I buy Solo cups, if I get takeout every night in styrofoam containers, that's not going to kill the world. So I would just rather not have this conversation. You do you and I'll do me.
See what you're saying. I think though, sometimes we're so used to having parties a certain way, the convenience of takeout, we forget to see that solutions can also be fun and convenient. For a party, we can have fun without affecting the earth. In fact, we can have even more fun and it can help us out. If we don't bring red Solo cups, people can bring their own cup. We don't have to wash and clean up everything, and people don't lose track of their drinks. How about we try it out and see what happens?
All right, well, you convinced me. Awesome. So do you want to maybe give an example to Evelyn?
Okay, all right, Evelyn, let's see. About Alaska, I don't know, Evelyn. I just feel like the rising temperatures are not all that bad, It exposes more land, and we're already having a housing shortage and a housing crisis with the prices. We should be building on that for our community. Moreover, we have so much oil we can drill into. Why wouldn't you want to tap into that? I just feel like we need to do that for our people. See?
Well, Ashley, I can see that you're very skeptical and doubtful about the changes in temperatures in Alaska and how climate is warming here. And I can see that it is important to you that Alaskans are able to have housing and jobs to protect their socioeconomic well-being. So drilling for more oil means more jobs. Um, you know, coastal villages being eroded because of warming temperatures, lives are being threatened, but I can understand how you feel that it's so important to make sure that people have roofs over their heads and jobs to support themselves and their families. So tell me more about what you know about the rising temperatures in Alaska and how these warming trends have affected the lives of people in coastal villages here. And what else can you share with me about what happens to oil prices if the oil reserves in our state are not open for drilling? So Ashley can have this beautiful, respectful conversation about oil prices, drilling, erosion of coastal villages. And then I say, Ashley, you are someone who really cares about making sure that people here especially those living in coastal villages in Alaska have roofs over their heads and have jobs so that they can support themselves and their families. I respect you for having those values and having those qualities.
That's great. And I love that final statement because it even makes me respect the character that she's playing more. You know, she's not just trying to destroy the earth. Like, she has values and she cares a lot about people's livelihood. So even you saying that makes me feel more for her character as well. We have just a few minutes. Are there any questions or comments from our participants?
There weren't any questions at the moment, Caitlin, but if anyone has a question, feel free to put your hands up in the chat there, or if you don't feel comfortable asking a question, put it in the chat.
Yes, the presentation will be shared on our YouTube channel. And once it's downloaded from the cloud, so you can go on YouTube, search for The Climate Initiative. We have some great videos there, including previous webinars and great resources. If you all have any questions in the future after you watch this or after you meditate on it, you can reach out to me at any time, Caitlin@theclimateinitiative.org. And if you have a question for one of our other presenters, Evelyn or Ashley, I will forward that on to them. We're like this, we're in contact all the time. So I'll make sure that we'll get your answer for you.
On it, Caitlin, it looks like we just had one question from Julia.
Awesome.
Oh, sorry. I put my hand down because I didn't want to, I do want to be respectful of your time if you have to go.
No, I'd love to hear your comment or question.
My question is, I guess I'm revealing my hand here. I notice that sometimes when I'm having conversations with others, I'm the one who I feel like I'm getting agitated because it's like, why don't you care? And I was wondering if you guys have any suggestions for if the other person is being totally chill and normal and I'm the one getting worked up, how do I stay calm in that situation?
That's good. Evelyn, you touched on some of this in the middle of your presentation. Do you want to talk a little bit about those strategies?
Sure. And Julia, thank you for the question. So the first thing I would suggest you do is, you said you already acknowledged that you're starting to feel agitated. So the easiest thing, first thing is take some deep breaths, because that helps calm that amygdala, the part of the brain where you're starting to feel really agitated and threatened because the other person is calm and making rational arguments about climate issues. So, yeah, take deep breaths. That will help calm your nerves.
Thank you. I think one of my mantras in the beginning is going to have to be mind your amygdala.
That will work.
I would say too that it is always okay to pause or to ask for a pause. So as transparent as you can be, and you can say, I've had conversations where I'll say, I really want to talk to you about this, but for me, this feels like this is gearing into something, is a conflict. Or I can say, right now, I'm having a lot of anxiety talking about this. Can we both just take a deep breath? Or just like, can I have a second to recenter? I think that too, the more authentic you are, when we're vulnerable, that allows other people to connect with us. So when you can be authentic and vulnerable and let someone know that, and you can say, I care very passionately about the environment. So when we talk about this, I'm very emotionally attached, and sometimes I get emotionally activated. So thank you for giving me a second just to bring it back down and being vulnerable with that other person.
And even if it's not just a second, and you have to, and there's an opportunity to do this, to re-enter the conversation, even another day or a week, when you can kind of think about what they were saying. And I'm not saying like get your revenge strategies in, but just take time. It's always okay to come back to things. You're not going to fix or talk about everything you want to in one conversation.
Those are really, really helpful. I think it's just helpful to hear that it's okay to be human in these conversations. We don't have to be perfect. Thank you.
We have to be human in these conversations. We have to be. This is so important for all of us.
Cool. All right, folks. Well, thank you all so much for being here. It means so much to all of us to see you. Ashley, thank you. Evelyn, thank you. You all were fantastic presenters and amazing resources for us. If you all have questions, feel free to reach out to me. If you were so excited today, you're like, I just have to get more involved. We would love to have you follow what we're doing and be a part of what we're doing. So the Climate Initiative is on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. We have them all covered. You can find us by searching for the Climate Initiative. Likewise, if, like Ashley, you want to join us as an ambassador, either as a high school ambassador, college, or adult ally ambassador, you can find that through our Mobilize, which oh gosh, I wish I knew it right offhand to drop into the chat. Do you have the link to Mobilize, Hiromi? He can drop it in the chat. And that's sort of a social media platform that is single issue. This is TCI social media platform to connect with other climate activists, to connect with TCI staff, stay in the loop about volunteering, about presenting a webinar like this. So Ashley's on there, and you see like the amazing work that our ambassadors do. So please feel free to reach out and join us in our mission. And thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you all. And I just put again all the links in the chat there for you. So thank you.
Right. It's great to see y'all.
Thank you all. Great session.